If only we did that like much earlier. We chose, to me, that the whole domain of pricing, again, the broader sense of the word, and value capturing is always like underestimated. Until the day, it's not, because you have to work on that. So my name is Omar Mohout. I eat, I sleep, I drink startups. As a day job, I'm doing M&A and finance for tech companies at Deloitte.
We all know you wrote Lean Pricing. It is about 12, 13 years ago?
Yes, 13 years ago.
And you moved now to M&A. In that path itself, is there something about pricing that changed your perception about it, that changed you on your view about pricing?
Good point. I think it's not a coincidence, Maarten, that pricing was my first book, because it was the number one issue I saw with technology companies struggling with is pricing. And yet, you might argue that 13 years later, it's still on top of my mind in there. I'm not like focusing on the subject of pricing. I'm interested in growth of companies, but the big lever and the big dimension is always pricing. So that's one thing. And the other hand is, the more I'm working even in M&A, the more you look into pricing as one of the few ways you can capture value. There are other ways, data for instance. Another one would be reviews. But the number one by far, capturing of value, is pricing. And yet, Maarten, as you know, doesn't get the right attention. Everybody focuses on value creation and the best product, whatever. Great. They focus also on go-to-market to a certain extent, a bit less. Even there we could improve in general, here in Belgium or in Europe. And lastly, value capturing doesn't get the attention it really deserves. And that's still, I'm not saying frustration, but it's an area and a domain where, in my view, should get much more attention. So for all these years, I'm still more than ever convinced that this is subject to be on the table more often than it is today.
Yeah, but is it because it's too complex?
It's not a question of being too complex. I'm not saying it's not complex in there. It's something very intangible. Creating a product is tangible. Doing marketing campaign is tangible. Pricing, intangible, right? And everybody has opinions and what to do. It's, it's like you're on the dark side of a certain subject. So specifically engineers, technical people coming from very tangible things down to earth. They are blue, they lack numbers, and this is also a number, but it's not like a number you can calculate as such. So they're pretty much lost. So it's one area where guidance is extremely important. Hence, I'm very pleased that it's your subject you're focusing on.
And as you're now working in M&A, if you're looking at a potential company you're working with, does pricing pop up on your checklist, or is it typically something as part of an M&A trajectory, the pricing and the pricing power of a company?
It's a given. It's absolutely given. I think Warren Buffett at some point said, if a company cannot increase the price by 10%, you have no market power. In other words, you will not invest. That's huge, right? In there. And it always stick with me in general. So I came from a meeting this morning. I was in Waregem, a company, beautiful company doing 10 millions this year, after 10 years, bootstrapped, impressive in there. Obviously, one of the elements I put on the table is, what about pricing? It's a given. The M&A, same thing. Look to M&A. One element in M&A is the valuation of a company. What a surprise. Valuation has a number of components as such, but obviously the financial performance is one of them. And in essence, if you want to increase your financial performance, the largest lever to do so is pricing. And let me give you an example. A lot of entrepreneurs at some point want to sell. The best time to start to prepare for that is 3 years before the transaction. Why? Because usually you're looking to the performance of the last 3 years. You get a multiple of your EBITDA, which EBITDA of the last 3 years. That's the time frame. Now, if you have 3 years, Maarten, to optimize and maximize your value, what levers do you have to do so? What are the, not quick wins, but things which have like quite a big impact on your EBITDA and your valuation if you have only 3 years in there? Cannot name a lot of them, but by far, pricing is the lever you have to use.
And distribution potentially as well?
Yes, the distribution will only, the impact of distribution will be after 3 years in there. You start building the distribution, but the value will be captured by the other party who will acquire it, which is fine, but the impact is much longer term than if you work on pricing these 3 years.
And the part of the term of the contracts of the companies, because pricing is one thing, of course, and it's a number you put on there with a certain vision behind that, but then you have, of course, also your contracts themselves. And I hear a lot of companies say, yeah, we want to have long contracts because then we have stable cash flow, less pricing power, in my view, of course, that's all. In M&A, how is that looked upon, the terms in the contract itself?
Yeah, that's a good point. Look to M&A and also funding. The difference between M&A and funding is very small, but the difference is in funding you have X number of shares of a company, in M&A you go to 100%. But it's the same process at the end of the day. The buyer has a different profile, but it's the same process. So what's important for tech companies are 2 quantitative and 2 qualitative elements. On the qualitative side is, first of all, is your business model in there. I mean, how do you indeed create the value, how do you bring it to the market, how do you capture value? Obviously, pricing is part of that, substantial even. The other element is scalability. And the dream of every company, indeed, is that your revenue goes faster than your cost. And everybody dreams of the exponential growth in there and not too much of linear growth, i.e. growing with people, service company. You have something in between, which is called superlinear growth, also interesting hybrid model. There are 2 things which looked into. To come to your point, the dream there, the perfect would be recurring revenue in there. If you have recurring revenue, which is forward-looking, your value is also much higher than you have a transactional kind of business. Yet, from my point of view, you have the contractual reality, but it's also a danger because you lock yourself in, which means your pricing power goes down in exchange for long term. So you can look to the lifetime value of customers, you can look to churn. Even if there's no like recurring kind of contract, you can detect if somebody stays long term. If you have the quality there of long-term value with customers, but still have the open field to do work on pricing in there, that's to me much better than to have fixed kind of contracts which are there for long term in there. So often people looking to the fixed long-term contracts are valued, and by that leaving money on the table.
Yeah. So preparing 3 years up front means trying to transform your long-term contracts into better value capturing short-term contracts?
That would be very radical to say it that way, and yet I believe it should be on the table to be discussed. I'm not saying that you should do it, but it's something which is counterintuitive, and yet I do believe it has to be on the table for discussion. The outcome will be, we're not going to do it, and that's fine. It has an impact, or let's do that, and it also has an impact.
Pricing for me goes further than the price point.
The number.
The value you create as your company, and value can also be a network effect. Like you can perfectly decide to do market, look at Aikido today, just market capturing at any cost. They want to have as much labels, as much new customers. The money comes from somewhere else at this moment. So it's for me, pricing is not always just the price point. It's the value you create in the company as a bigger whole there. But that's related to M&A, or if you have something based on what you wrote in the book that you said, maybe I would do that completely different today, or I look completely different at that today.
Yeah, so compared to 13 years ago.
Yeah. You have 12 years now between a book you wrote there, which is an awesome book, by the way. A lot of people still reference it and use it. And today there might be some voortschrijdend inzicht, like we say in Belgium, of course.
Yeah. Well, of course, back then I didn't have experience in M&A and finance of these companies. And so also grow in that respect. And you're also correct in the sense that price is not just a number in there. To me, it's indeed much broader. How do you package something, how do you position them in the traditional 4 or 5 P that you're using from a marketing point of view, always going back to that, absolutely true. But the whole mechanism of value capturing, which is in itself very broad, is the element where, like I said earlier, doesn't get enough attention, in my view. Now, looking now from an M&A point of view, so if you're an entrepreneur, very likely, Maarten, the last thing you will ever do is to sell your company, right? So it's not something you just can ignore. Hence the reason I said earlier, It might well be that shorter-term contracts might be a better option than long-term contracts, although it's counterintuitive if you fully agree in there, because there's a lot on stake here, right? So if you take it from that point of view in there and you open the whole subject around pricing in the broader sense that we discussed in there, you might end up with a different company, which is quite amazing, eh? That's because you're looking for an exit, you're going to change your company. It doesn't make sense. It's against counterintuitive, right? Usually transformations take time in there, and you might argue that some things you have to be careful with because transformation might take longer than the horizon of selling. Now, to be in reality, you have the 3 years, you sell the company, you have the 2 years earnout. Typically, you have to stay 2 years, so totally it's 5 years, more or less. And yet, despite the fact that transformation will scare you off because it means over horizon, it's a lot of work, maybe you're not going to focus on the right thing is, and yet it's the best time to have that discussion in there. It's like a lever that the whole M&A creates momentum and objective in there, because as an entrepreneur, you look to the future, but now you have a fixed point in time, and you know that the time is starting today to get there. That creates a lot of pressure. That pressure can really have outcomes, and often when you work at companies doing that, Maarten, they will say, if only we did that like much earlier. Which shows to me that the whole domain of pricing, again the broader sense of the word, and value capturing is always like underestimated. Until the day, it's not, because you have to work on that.
Yeah, it works today, so why would I change my price? The money comes in, okay, it's not ideal, but I have customers, I have things, and why would I change that?
Indeed,
and there's no
because they say, listen, Omar, we have a very nice gross margin, which is true in software, you can have up to 95%, it's amazing. I don't know any business, I don't know any legal business, I have to be careful, where you can have that kind of margins. It's amazing. And second, you say, listen, Omar, my compound annual growth rate of the last 3 years, always 3 years looking back in there, it's 30%, so 35. And you say, that's great, but you might leave money on the table. We're doing all fine in there. There's no need to question that in 3 years, you might really impress that. And here's the point. The moment you sell, there is, of course, I mean, if you take a typical multiple, which is between 4, 6, 8, depending on other parameters in there, that means whatever you do get multiplied with a factor 4 or 6 or 8. So any euro that you can add in these 3 years, on average, gives you leverage of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10. Wow, isn't that magic? To me, it's really like magic in there. So yes, it's an amazing time, these 3 years. A lot of things can happen, and people feel like, wow, I've been waking up. Then you become like the real entrepreneur, and next time you're gonna do it different.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the memory of your 1% price increase drops to 10% bottom line. Indeed. Revenue increase. If you then multiply that in the multiples afterwards.
Yes, I mean, if you do it, this is a very good logic. Let's take 10 to make it easy to calculate. So you get the 10% on your bottom line. Because you have the multiple on that, you have one-time revenue, the whole value of your company, which you can add in your exit, Maarten. I mean, there is no, maybe there are other ways. Don't know any other way to create more value in such a short time than focusing on that. And
not related to pricing, but for you, when you get involved, is that at the moment it starts germinating, that the customer thinking about we're going, so your lead time is 3 years working with these founders, or is it often on a shorter time frame that they want to talk to you and get the M&A done?
Unfortunately, people want to sell tomorrow in there. When they contact us, in general, it's true that we are pretty late in there. On the other side, what we're doing is we talk to entrepreneurs. So the person I saw this morning was not planning to sell, but it's good to create awareness at that moment in time. Or we give workshops with FOCA, for instance, which is like readiness for future exit. So we're working with entrepreneurs who are not yet in the mindset of selling to make them aware of that. We're doing workshops to create awareness in there. But when you get the call, it's often like has to be sold by tomorrow. Well, it takes anyway around 9 months, which is too short to really work on that. So something where, in terms of awareness, to start doing it much earlier in planning. In my opinion, there's a lot of work to be done. Working with companies, like if you ever want to do an exit, you have to know that this last 3 years is extremely important. Now we have time, so we can do whole transformation. But as you know, if there's no time pressure, things don't change that fast. So that's the nice thing about these 3 years.
Yeah, that's true. If there's one thing you think about, that's very obvious for you now in your current role as M&A advisor, or how do I call that? That's so obvious that you think founders should know. They don't think about that, they're not aware of that, but they really should know that. What would that one thing be?
You see, I'm doing that now for almost a year and a half, and it's really a métier. It's something that you learn as such. And what we really offer is it's a structured process. In my view, what a lot of founders say, I can sell my company, I can do it myself. Why would I need an advisor? Why I need to work with Deloitte on the subject in there? From that point of view, what happens is, first of all, there's an opportunity cost. The largest problem you might have, except for fraud or something, is that you start the process, the time that you close this will be 9 months, so almost a year, and you miss your first forecast, short-term forecast, because you focus for the first year. So imagine you forecast you're going to do 10 million in there, you end up at 8 million. I mean, whatever you do, anything behind year one is fantasy if you miss your first year. Why would founders being so bad in estimating the forecast for 1 year, except for some dramatic things that happens, I mean, some war or crises in there? The reason is simple, it's opportunity cost, because if you're focusing on a sale process in there, you don't have time to focus on your customers in your market in there, because your bandwidth will go to the other side. Where of course, we as an advisor are absorbing that kind of energy and time and help you in doing that so you can focus on the business. Yes, you have to give input, of course, that you're going to be involved. So the mistake that they make is by doing it themselves, and some might be able to do it, which is fine, is that focusing on this very intense process, it's especially the closing part, you cannot imagine how intense it is. I mean, it's going really, I mean, it's really in terms of pressure, long days, short nights, the whole thing in there. But even before, it takes a lot of energy in there. I mean, I have a team working on that. Obviously, that time has to be done by somebody else. And we are professional in the sense we do nothing else. It's a machine. Imagine, Maarten, you do it for the first time, never did that, and then you come up with your first forecast. I can guarantee you will not make that forecast. So I think that's the biggest mistake. The second thing is, difference between first-time founder and a second-time founder is the attention they're giving to legal from the beginning to make it spick and span. Yeah, but legal in there, you don't like that in there. All the things that second-time founders doing right, because they learned the hard way, exactly the things that first-time founders don't like. But every week I see term sheets passing. That's my job, see them passing. And yet, if tomorrow I would do a transaction for my own company, I will make sure the right team will help me from legal, tax, whatever. Not just legal, M&A legal, people who know what it really means in there. So yes, I can read a term sheet in there, but I don't have 20 years experience with the other people. So by definition, you need to have support there.
I understand as well, a lot of founders see a lot of cost going out. It's almost like selling your house. You can do that yourself, or you ask a makelaar to do that for you. But I understand as well, as an entrepreneur, you want to stay eye on the ball. It's the company, and the company has to grow. And the rest is details. Okay, it costs a lot of money for sure, but it's after the comma in the end if you stay successful.
Yes, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, to give you a number, you sell your company, and yes, it costs you like 3%, like the real estate agent will cost you 3%. It's similar in there. But the difference here is that the opportunity cost, which selling the house is not that intensive, you can put it on IMO yourself in there, and there's no focus, you have to deliver whatever. This is the largest mistake people make from that point of view.
Okay, because it's only selling once and it's the whole thing.
Exactly, and it's not because I'm doing that business, it's just I know the other side of things. And again, we had last week, I had a call with a founder who was doing it himself in there, and what happens is the deal was cancelled. They had the end of last year as normally the closing, and they came back and said, hey, we really apologize, there's another file which is we're doing now, it's urgent, and we have to focus on the other file, we'll come back to you in there. Already a bad sign in there. And things get to slip, and of course, slipping led to we're not going to do the deal in there. That means you lost all the time. When we do that, we put in rules, right? Get a process letter tells you, but then you can do your non-binding offers, but then you can do this, the interviews, but then you can do diligence. So you're playing a certain game, leave the options open. You want to have more than one party, of course, in there. So if you do it yourself and you end up on one party, other party knows they have exclusivity in there. I mean, you're not the priority, yeah? There might be another file passing by, which is a bigger opportunity as such. And the founder, he was experienced what the first time doing transaction, and yet it ended up like, cancelled. Yet we had to call to get help again.
From an M&A perspective, I understand that. From a VC perspective, if you would VC, do you agree that a founder better there does it himself, or should he also look for external help there?
Very good question. What happens, I see founders, they say, I need to have 100,000 euros. Fine. Here is the list of business angels, contact them. I need 500,000. Fine, here's some early pre-seed investors who are looking into that. Here's the list, contact them. I need 1 million, 1.5 million. Fine, here's this of VCs who will do it for you. For me, the value I will bring, what you're looking for 1.5 million, 100,000 euros. Why? I mean, yes, you can help you with the legal people and my colleagues, but for myself, it doesn't make sense. But now you're looking for 10 million. And you want to have smart money on board. You want to make sure at the right conditions, right, in there. Then, Maarten, I believe you need to have support. Then I think a team should support you in finding the right investors, the right horizon, with the right focus, matching what you need to have at the right conditions means not just valuation, because that's another mistake people think, is so much focus on having the highest valuation, right? Because then we have the right number. Fine, I talk about funding specifically, but that's only one parameter. There are other things which are important because an investor might be flexible to you on, you want to have 30 million, really? Okay, I agree with you, pre-money, 30 million. But you need to have liquidity preference of factor 3. I need to have some warrants to guarantee you that is like when the down round comes to me. Password 3 years later, you screwed. I mean, you had your valuation in there, but at the end of the day, you looked at the cap table and you looked at the when there's exit, who gets what money in there, and you have to pay 3 times back to the funder first before it's your turn, and then whatever is left is being guaranteed. You might end up with such a small amount of money that maybe it was better to agree to 20 million valuation, perhaps, but you don't have all these exotic clausules which force you to, at the end of the day, at unfavorable conditions. Typical mistake, valuation is such a focus point that you forgot that, and you will be surprised. Investors are quite flexible, so you know, like, oh, we can compensate it in that way. You're expert, Maarten. I mean, it's like you doing pricing. You eat, you sleep, you do pricing. When I talk to you, you know what you're talking about. I mean, do you really think as an entrepreneur, you're talking to investors who are every day talking to entrepreneurs and negotiating that you are better than them? They know what you're doing.